Hey, today we'll be delving into the lore of the Dreadfleet and its awesome leader, Count Noctilus, as well as his allies. So what exactly is the Dreadfleet? The Dreadfleet was a pirate fleet led by the infamous Count Noctilus. The fleet was composed of many different pirates, not all vampiric in origin. It was pretty diverse actually, not your normal vampires and ghosts, which you expect, but it also had some Egyptian skeletons and their living statues, undead rats, and a dwarf who's technically a chaos dwarf, but not really. While most of the captains of these vessels had differing goals, they were ultimately loyal to the Count. They would plunder the sea for 20 years before they faced any real resistance. A grand alliance of pirates, mercenaries, dwarfs, and elves would come together to stop them. The head of this alliance was Jago Roth, a human pirate who stole the Grand Theogenist personal ship, the Heldenhammer. Noctilus had killed his family in one of his raids, so Captain Roth wanted vengeance and created the Grand Alliance. So now that we have a basic understanding of the Dreadfleet, let's learn a bit about their leader. Count Noctilus wasn't always a legendary figure, or even known as Noctilus. Originally, he was just another member of the midnight aristocracy in Sylvania known as Nyklaus von Carstein. Nyklaus had gotten tired of the infighting and intrigue of his peers in Sylvania and sought out a different way to gain power. He searched through many different sorcerer's tomes and noticed there were charts that showed how the winds of magic ebbed and flowed across the world. Nyklaus realized if he mastered the art of seafaring, he could learn to harness the winds of magic's flow. How sailing helps him master magic, I don't know. It's just what his book said, I guess. Nyklaus had also heard news of a giant maelstrom deep in the sea. It seemed to pull the dead into it like a lodestone and was full of dark magic. Nyklaus von Carstein realized this was exactly what he was looking for and began conducting dark rituals and experiments so he could understand the maelstrom and its power. For years, Nyklaus would study the art of translocation, which is a form of shadow magic. Translocation does exactly what it sounds like, teleportation. So mighty was Nyklaus's power in this art that not only could he teleport himself and his minions places, but also the land alongside them. So, on one dark Geheimnisnacht, Nyklaus von Carstein raised 1,200 dead and began his dark ritual to transport himself, his new minions, and his beloved castle to the maelstrom known as the Galleon's Graveyard. During his ritual, a mighty storm brewed over the entire empire, with lightning crashing so loudly some say it even woke up Karl Franz from his slumber in the imperial palace of Altdorf. Nyklaus's ritual had succeeded and he found himself in the Galleon's Graveyard. Filled with the power of the graveyard, he then combined a bunch of destroyed ships with his castle to create his legendary ship, the Bloody Reaver. This is probably the closest thing Warhammer Fantasy will get to a Space Hulk, and man is it awesome. Nyklaus saw this as a sort of rebirth for himself and renamed himself Count Noctilus. With all the power of the Galleon's Graveyard flowing throughout him, he had great control over the undead and used it to begin forming a mighty fleet. First, he bent the captain and crew of the infamous ghost ship Shade Wraith to his will. The Shade Wraith had claimed to sail the Dark Moon more asleep in the sky. Its captain Vangheist had become one of his more useful admirals. He'd then meet up with a dwarf who's kind of a chaos dwarf, kind of not. He works for the chaos dwarves. He rides the Black Kraken, a giant submarine that looks like a kraken, hence the name. He made a pact with them to raid the seas together. Eventually, he raised a mighty sea monster from the dead, only to find he accidentally raised some Skaven pirates inside of it back to life too. He made a deal with them, and they joined his fleet, using the sea monster as their new ship. When Jago Roth's Grand Alliance was formed, a Tomb King called Amanhotep, who wanted vengeance on Jago Roth, would ally with the fleet to destroy him. Amanhotep was obsessed with vengeance on par with dwarfs and their grudges. With the Dreadfleet assembled, Noctilus would spend the next 20 years conquering the oceans and strengthening Galleon's Graveyard. Jago Roth's Grand Alliance would attempt to stop him. This is where we get a little bit of a timeline split between the main continuity and Total War. In the Dreadfleet novel, Noctilus and his crew are defeated by order when they get chased into the Maelstrom and it's sealed by magic and blown up by his scheme by Tzeentch, just as planned. Although the Tomb King, Amanhotep, apparently managed to escape and make it back home, which is nice considering he was the only member of the Dreadfleet with somewhat noble goals. In Total War Warhammer, the Battle of Galleon's Graveyard was inconclusive. Noctilus and Jago managed to survive, as well as RNS Saltspite, one of the members of the Alliance and a legendary lord in Total War Warhammer. Roth's ship, the Heldenhammer, was sunk as it's a landmark in-game in the Galleon's Graveyard. In the text for Noctilus' quest battle for Roth's Moondial, it's implied that Roth is alive and the one who hired the mercenaries to retrieve it. During Noctilus' Vortex campaign in Total War Warhammer 2, he seeks to kill the guardian sea monster of the High Elves, Amanar, and raise it from the dead as his minion. To do this, he had to find a harpoon created to kill it, reunite the lost pirate shanties, and then face off against Lokir Felhart, who wanted the honor of killing the legendary beast. After besting Lokir, Amanar would become Noctilus' newest thrall. In game, this is represented by not being attacked by it in a random event. That's it. Pretty lame considering the awesome setup. I mean, I understand them not wanting to make the giant kaiju a unit, but why not at least give you an ability as some sort of passive for having it, or even a spell? Regardless, Noctilus wasn't able to find Jago Roth and get his revenge on him. So, he decides he'll continue feeding the Galleon's Graveyard in hopes that it will allow him to travel back in time and kill the Roth lineage so that he doesn't exist anymore. Noctilus went full Terminator on Roth. I mean, geez, is he really that butthurt over a draw? It's better than the canon alternative. So now that we've discussed the big man in charge, why not take a look at his allies? First off, we'll be looking into the lone Dawi and allied to the Chaos Dwarfs because this story is arguably the most interesting and shocking of Noctilus' allies. The dwarf known as Tordrek Hackhart was one of the most talented engineers of Barak Vara, working alongside his friend Red Brock Gunnarsson. They worked alongside each other for decades. Tordrek was very competitive and yearned to be the best engineer to all Dawi. Unfortunately, his guild brother Red Brock got that title instead. Tordrek was extremely angry and jealous. After all, he was the best crafter of submersibles by far. After decades of the hatred growing, he accidentally shot Red Brock over a dozen times with a steam-powered rivet claw. Brock survived through sheer stubbornness because dwarves are awesome, and Tordrek was exiled from the Engineers Guild forever. Tordrek had already kind of lost it at this point though, and slaughtered his way out of the hold and hopped into his most impressive creation, the most advanced submarine in Barak Var's fleet, the Black Kraken. This submersible could somehow be operated by only one person, so that was convenient for Tordrek, I guess. Tordrek was basically banished from society, and so he traveled north into the Sea of Chaos, where he fought many beasts before finally making it into the smog-covered, ashy lands of the Dawi Zar. Tordrek would join the Chaos Dwarves, and slowly he would begin to change. It said he wasn't entirely himself anymore, having succumbed to the worship of the dark gods. It morphed him and changed him. The Chaos Dwarves would also bind a demon to the Black Kraken, making it even more deadly than it already was. He'd eventually meet up with Count Noctilus and agree to work with him in exchange for helping him get revenge on his old buddy Red Brock. He's pretty strange for a Dawi or Dawi Zar, but he's a pretty cool one-off character nonetheless. The next of Noctilus' allies we'll be discussing is Amanhotep the Intolerant. Amanhotep was the lord of Xandri, and when Jago Roth stole his gold, he was mad, and Amanhotep vowed he'd consume one human pirate's soul for every ounce of gold stolen. This guy's pretty metal. He then went to work on constructing a ship out of parts of pyramids, bone giants, and living statues. It also had a curse beam and a sunbeam. This ship was no joke. It was known as the Curse of Xandri. Also, I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but all these boats are massive. They make normal ships look like toys. While they aren't the size of Black Arcs, they're certainly approaching it. Captain Vangheist and his Ghost Crew story is a pretty simple one. They're mercenaries hired by a light wizard who sailed to the Sea of Chaos to banish a beast of chaos. They then betrayed the light wizard after the beast was slain because they thought they would become immortal if they traveled further into the seas. They technically got what they wanted, becoming ghosts who sailed through the realms of chaos and over the ocean. They also sailed through more sleep while going through the realms of chaos, so that's neat. They only have one purpose now: to spread the misery they feel all around the world. These guys are just another prime reason why you don't mess with chaos. The final ally of Noctilus we'll be discussing is Captain Skretch Half-Dead of Clan Scurvy aboard the Scabrous. Despite the fact Skretch is called half-dead, he sure looks dead to me. Skretch was an infamous pirate lord of the Skaven clan Scurvy who specialized in naval warfare, as their name implies. Or I guess the name could imply that they're sick of scurvy too. Skretch had heard there was a warpstone in the galleon's graveyard, so naturally him and his crew set sail there to take it for themselves, because Skaven love warpstone. This went about how you would expect a bunch of rats sailing to the living heart of the sea would go, which is to say, badly. The Skaven had encountered an orb leviathan, a gigantic sea monster many times the size of Skretch's largest ships. It had massive teeth and a glowing green lure dangling from its head. The Skaven had tried desperately to combat this creature to no avail, so the fleet was destroyed. The crew of Skretch's ship were lucky enough to be swallowed, and as a result they had survived the ordeal. They then devoured the creature from the inside, eventually killing it. Still, even if they had beaten it, they were still trapped inside its corpse, a pretty Pyrrhic victory if you could even call it one. Eventually the Skaven all died in its corpse, and the corpse had made its way to the galleon's graveyard, as all dead of the sea do. Noctilus had found the corpse of the sea monster and figured it would make a good tool for his fleet, so he resurrected it, unknowingly saving the rats too. The Skaven inside the beast began rebuilding their boat from within the beast, using it as their own new ship. When Noctilus called to them with his power, they drowned him out with their screaming bell and began firing on him with their warp lightning cannons. Noctilus was impressed and signaled for a parley with the Skaven. Noctilus would offer Skretch as much warpstone as he could get his hands on in exchange for eternal servitude. Skretch thought this was a good deal and accepted it. Plus, considering he's a Skaven, he could always just betray Noctilus later. Skretch would call the cadaver he used as a ship the Scabrous. Man, this video is much longer than I thought it'd be. I figured I could just cram all of this into a 5-minute lore, but quickly realized there's just too much to do that. So I'm sorry if this is a bit later than expected. That said, it's still been fun to do. I absolutely adored the art done for the Dreadfleet game, and it does seem like there was some love poured into it. Although, I will admit, it's really strange to see a dwarf who willingly joined the Chaos Dwarves. Tordrek's an enigma in general though, but I still have mixed feelings about that. Out of all the Dreadfleet characters, I have no idea why Aranessa was chosen as another undead pirate lord by CA. It feels really weird seeing her resort to raising the dead and such when her opponents were literally vampirates. I doubt any other Dreadfleet characters will make it into Warhammer 3, but if they do, it certainly would be a pleasant surprise. Also, Dreadfleet seems to take place 20 years after Karl Franz's coronation, but Total War moved it before, which is fine, but just an interesting thing I'd note. I love the Vampirates, and it was neat doing some research into one of their main inspirations. I've been pretty busy with school, so I'm sorry in advance if the next video is a bit late. Also, hey, I know I've said it before, but thanks to everyone who's liked my content and subscribed. It means a ton to me. If you like this video, then I suggest you jump further down the Warhammer rabbit hole.